I'm Brittany.
And I'm Heather.
Welcome to Okayest Moms, the podcast.
A place to be more than just mom.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. Today we are talking all things reading, raising good readers, helping reluctant readers, and a few suggestions of books that you can read too to help your readers and be a good example. Because if there's one thing we've learned by now, is if we want our kids to do something, we have to do it.
So annoying. Oh gosh. What have you read lately?
Well, I have been kind of doing a mix of Audible and like physical books. I'm trying to do more physical books in the summer when my kids are home to see me do it and I have the time to like sit and read. But I really do love Audible for when I don't have the focus to sit down and do something, but I also want to be reading. So recently, my physical book selection was called Hello Beautiful. It's by Anne Napolitano, and it's about a family of sisters who kind of like go through the transition of living together all under one roof and how their lives change and come apart as they get older and like how they navigate adulthood. And it's also got some good pieces in there about mental health and you know, kind of some of the choices you make as a young adult, thinking you have everything on track, but then you become a real adult and you're like, oh, I don't know anything. So it was really good. I loved it. I finished it in like 3 days. So that's my number one current pick. She also wrote Dear Edward, which I have not read, but was turned into a series on Apple Plus.
Oh, I love doing that,
Yeah.
like reading the book and then watching the series. That's my favorite thing.
Yeah, I don't know if that one speaks to me. That one's about a child who's the lone survivor of a plane crash. Like, children and trauma is like not my genre. So
no, that's really hard for me to read.
Yeah, but I did love this author. So write something else, please.
We're waiting.
All right, what's your most recent read?
I just finished. I don't remember if I talked about this on the podcast yet, but I'm sure
90% of these are repeats, but you know,
I know,
whatever.
right? Camp Zero. It's like a dystopian novel, which is always my novel of choice. And basically, it's about climate change.
We have enough of that?
And I know. Well, that's why I have to read it. I have to be prepared for all scenarios. It's about climate change, and this group of people move to the north because it's basically the only place you can live anymore. And there's just a lot of crossover between stories, but not until the end. It's like one of those where you're like, where is this going? But at the end, everything's all interconnected. But it was really, I liked it. It kept my attention. I feel like I've read a lot of books lately that I've had to give up on because I'm just like not feeling it, or like it's a slog to get through.
So that's something we talk about with our guests today. And it's something I've just started doing. I think before I always felt like I had to stick it out. And I'm realizing that the amount of focus and attention and time I have to read is very limited. And I don't want to waste it on something I don't love. It's a little easier for me to do that with an Audible book. So my other recent read is called Really Good, actually, by Monica Heisey. And I didn't love it, but I found myself intrigued enough that I kept coming back to it because I did want to see what the ending was. But I think had it been a physical book, I think I would have thrown in the towel.
Right, and you use that credit. You gotta...
Right, exactly. So Really Good actually is about a new divorcee and how, like a young divorcee, I think she's like in her early 20s in the book, and how she kind of like stumbled into the marriage because it felt like the next right thing to do, and how she's like navigating life after that. And I could really see it being like, it almost felt like I was reading a screenplay. It's like, it feels like they're trying to make this a show, which like I probably would have watched the show, and I did finish the book. And so it was a good light summer read. Didn't knock me off my socks, but I'd already spent the credits, so I was in it.
I know, that's the hard part about Audible. Oh, Camp Zero is by Michelle Minsterling, by the way. The one that I've given up on, so I talked about this in like one of our favorites episodes because I was really liking it at the time. There was like, so it's A Court of Thorns and Roses series, which is fantasy, fairy, whatever. They're kind of big on Instagram right now amongst our demographic.
It feels like the new 50 Shades.
Yeah, but it's not even that. So, okay. I read the first book because everybody said just get through the first book and then the second book is great. And I agree. The second book was great. I got halfway through the third book and realized I was thinking about other things when I was listening to it. It wasn't keeping my attention. It feels like it just drones on and on and on. And the main character is deeply unlikable. So I decided to just throw in the towel. I think I had 2 hours left on it and I was done. But people love them. People are obsessed with them. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just missing something there.
Next up on my to-read list is called Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. And I don't really know much about it. I've heard really good things about it. And the cover's really cute. And that pretty much checks all my boxes.
Oh, I didn't know we were doing to-read books. Okay, so I talk about this a little bit in the episode, but I signed my kids up for the summer reading program and we are doing it. And I decided I needed to get an actual physical book. I haven't read one of those in a long time. It's been Audible or digital, but we talk about this in the episode more. And I just it's called Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. And it's supposed to be kind of a thriller. So we'll see.
Yeah, if you haven't been to your local library, go check them out. Especially at this point in the summer, you're probably hitting a lull and you need something new. Our local library, if you're local to our area, it has an amazing summer reading program. And it's for all ages, all the way, I think it starts at toddler, all the way up to adult. They have some really good prizes. And I am just really looking forward to just blowing my kids' goal out of the water. so I can be the example so they can see that it can be fun.
Also, you like to win.
Also, I signed AJ up, so that's going to be another lesson I'm learning. See, Dad never picks up a book, and did he get a cool prize? No, he didn't, because he's a loser.
Yes, these are important lessons.
Yes, they are. No, but even besides the summer reading program, go to your local library, honestly, because they have so many good activities, fun things outside of just books that are on shelves. I think that's what so many people think. It's just a bunch of books piled up on a shelf where you have to be quiet. At least our library system is really good. They have scavenger hunts in there. You can check out STEM boxes that you can play with while you're there. They have usually some kind of coloring saying where you can do some kind of art and then they put it on the wall to make a big, larger piece. They have really good stuff there, and those people work very hard, and it's just a cool place. So go check it out.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's take a break and we'll be back with our guest. Our listeners know my love and devotion for a certain big box store, but you might be surprised to know that I have a new big box store in my life.
Sam's Club offers the bulk pantry staples, snacks, and fresh produce you've come to expect, but it also offers a wide variety of home goods, electronics, toys, and even gas stations at most locations. You can even scan and go as you shop, which means that you are spending less time in line to check out. All you have to do is scan the barcodes as you add things to your cart, go through a special line to finish the process, and you're on your way.
Right now, Okayest Moms listeners can get a Sam's Club membership for only $25, which is 50% off the regular price. Go to the link in the show notes to get your membership today.
With the busy back-to-school season just around the corner, there has never been a better time to try HelloFresh. With HelloFresh, you get everything you need to get dinner on the table delivered directly to your door. You choose the meals on their weekly menu, how many servings you'd like it to be, and they do the rest. No more trips to the grocery store or endless hours of meal planning because you can do it all in one step with HelloFresh. And if your plans change, you can easily skip a week on their super user-friendly app.
Okayest Moms listeners can get 18 meals free, which is 50% off your first 4 boxes, making the price per serving under $5. To get this deal, just click through the link in our show notes and complete your order.
Hi, Kim. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name's Kim Jaxon, and I'm a professor of English at Chico State in Chico, California. And I think about literacy. I think about the teaching of reading and writing, some digital literacy, and then I think carefully about teaching of science writing. So that's my kind of background. And I don't have little kids anymore, but I do have a new grandbaby. And she's pretty awesome.
And she's so cute.
It's
Oh my gosh. Her book collection must be huge already.
Yeah, I have, let's just say I have an Excel spreadsheet.
I love it. Well, so Kim, you are actually a professor in my department because Brittany and I both went to Chico State. I was never lucky enough to have you as a professor because your sections were always full the second the classes opened. So I am so excited. I feel like this is like, I get to go back to school and ask, like, get the course again.
That's great. Yeah. I love teaching those classes too. And Brittany and I got to hang out a lot together because Brittany was our support.
Yeah, I worked in the English department through college and then a little bit after college while I had my kids there. And it was an adventure.
You were very good at your job and we miss you all the time. So yeah. And those cute kids. Y'all have cute kids. All of you have cute kids.
All right, well, let's talk about how those kids don't want to read.
Yeah.
So we've heard this from moms many times over that their children are just reluctant readers. And so what is your preferred approach to a child who's capable of reading, but just dreads it?
Yeah. I was thinking about our podcast today and was actually a little bit nervous in terms of sometimes my advice runs the opposite of like what anybody else will say. So, but I do think carefully about, especially young readers. And I think, Brittany, actually, you brought this up the other day. I think it was with Soli. They're going to be reluctant at different points in their life. So some of it is just like not stressing about the fact that you're having a moment when that's not their first choice of an activity. Having said that, and I think you will know this, the best way to model reading is you have to be reading. You have to constantly be reading yourself. And I know it's hard sometimes because, we can be reading even a digital text on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
It just looks like we're on our screen, but at least talking to your kids about like, no, I'm actually reading on my Kindle, or I'm reading on whatever, stacks of books around the house. I think, parents really, if you read at home, your kids are going to read. That's just kind of all the research shows. If they're surrounded by reading materials, it's modeled by them all the time, they will read. Having said that, I used to be a little tricksy with the reluctant reader moments with my own kids. And I would have friends of mine make book recommendations to my kids instead of me. Because sometimes it went a lot further to have a good friend, that they already know when they were 8 or 9, say, oh my gosh, Ash, I know you're totally interested in unicorns or whatever the thing is. And I came across this book the other day and I just thought you might think it was cool. And they would leave it. And that went so much further.
That makes perfect sense because anything mom says is just immediately canceled out.
Yep. And sometimes that was, contrived. Like that was, I was like, hey, we're having a moment. What would you recommend? And people would. Now I work in an English department, so it makes it real easy for people to make recommendations. But that went a long way. But mostly it's to not stress, to not force it, to not stress about it, to trust that they have these kind of waves where they're interested in something different. They're working on more like motor skills, so they're outside more, or that they want to game, board games or play games instead. Like that reading is so much a part of their life, probably every moment. It doesn't necessarily have to be a book, that they're reading.
Well, and to just kind of piggyback on that a little bit, I think when you have somebody who's a child who can already read, so we're not looking at, like blending and phonics and things like that, it's really more about the comprehension than it is the actual reading of the story. Like, sure, we want them to read for pleasure, but really the skills they're working on at that point is comprehension. And you can do that kind of thing with any activity that you're doing. It's just simply asking kind of deeper, higher level thinking questions about the activity that you're doing. And those skills will transfer to reading and text.
Totally. I mean, you get it, right? It's even things like we're going to look at a recipe together, or we're going to look at how to put together a Lego set that has, reading involved in it. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you should notice that they're reading all the time, actually. And all the research right now shows that these generations are reading more than ever. People are always panicked about, we've been screaming about, kids and reading since writing was invented. Like Socrates was really upset about writing being invented. So we've been screaming, get off my lawn for a very long time around kids literacy. and they're reading and writing more than any generation has ever done, because it's just ubiquitous, right? Text is everything.
Right.
So, and as those comprehension skills get stronger, I think reading for pleasure gets a little easier and a little more enjoyable because they're not struggling with the text as much. So,
yeah, exactly. God, it's so true.
That makes me feel a lot better, because I had a 9-year-old one-person riot over here when we had to sign up for the summer reading program. And I was just like, fine, be stupid. Like, it's not my problem. You have to live with this. And really, like, this week he's been in theater camp. And so, like, they've been reading their script the whole time. Like, he knows the whole script by heart. So it makes me feel better to know that, yes, they are reading all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't, we often equate it, you have to ask, what do you mean by reading, right? We often equate reading with like someone sitting with a novel, right?
Right.
And think about how many adults, if you ask them, well, what's the last novel? I think the other mistake some people will make is they get really worried about, like, are they, you can do a library thing, Brittany, and then someone's so worried about that they're picking the book that's at their level or those kinds of things.
Okay, let's talk about this.
Yeah.
Because first of all, there are a million different ways to level books and level readers.
Yep.
Also, there's the whole like instructional level of reading and then independent level of reading. Like, there's so many different ways. And what's your take on all of this?
So a lot of this, right? A lot of the ways that the schools figure out levels is through those Lexile scores, right? And Lexile indexes are really kind of funky. They're a little odd because they're based on sentence length and word repetition. So the way books get actually leveled can be really weird, because something that's actually really complicated in terms of the content can have a lower score than something that just has a lot of long sentences in it, right? So Harry Potter gets a really high Lexile score and Twilight gets a really low one, which we can have debates about, all those things.
It's a different conversation.
Totally. So I'm not totally a fan. I think they're a piece of information, a piece, but often when kids are like, I don't really feel like it, and then you critique what the choice they make, like they go pick up a picture book and you're like, you're too old for picture books, or
but so many picture books have very complicated texts.
They're awesome. Yeah, they're awesome. In fact, I use a lot of picture books in my college teaching because they model things like how to make an argument, or how to, cite sources or whatever. So yeah, picture books can be super complex. So I think that too, like allowing the good readers do things like pick stuff they're interested in, they're reading for a purpose, and that when we don't like books, we put them down, and that's okay. I don't know why there's all this like being a good kid because you finished the book,
Mm-hmm.
Like putting it down's okay too.
Well, that may have been from Accelerated Reader.
I think that's exactly right. And if that I'm not a fan of Accelerated Reader, just for the record, but if that gets a kid excited because they're getting points, then whatever the thing is that gets the kid excited is totally reasonable for a way to do it. Those competition things, if you're interested in making lifelong readers, can be. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And so for anybody not familiar, Accelerated Reader is a program where each student is set a goal. It's usually like a number of books, number of pages, number of minutes read, and you get a certain amount of time to do it, like usually a trimester. And so some kids will figure out that they can game the system by reading the books with the most points, and they'll read like 3 really hard books and then they're done. And other kids will just like muddle through because they're, like choosing books they enjoy. So it has its benefits, I guess, but also, I mean, like it really does get kids reading.
Yeah,
whether that be for a short amount of time or not. But
absolutely. And I do think there's a difference in reading for school and then wanting to just, think about how you read outside of school.
Oh, absolutely. That's why so my kids and I have always been consistent library goers since they were little, mostly because that was like the only like contained place I could take small children where they could be children. And so that's just kind of always been part of our routine. There's always been a basket of library books in our house. And as much as it's pained me every visit, I've let them choose whatever books they've ever wanted. And I think one summer we got a book. It was a coffee table book. It was probably like the size of their torso, all about cats. And I mean, when I tell you like that was the biggest hit, and we got that was in the adult fiction, nonfiction section that we just happened to be going the way to the bathroom one day, and they're like, "What's this?" So you really do have to let them explore and find their own stuff, no matter how many times they get that stupid Pokemon book.
Yeah. No, that's a good point too, right? Think about how much they'll rewatch some show they like. It's the same thing with books, right? They're gonna reread. I do think that I did this. I don't know if this happened for both of your sets of kids. I'd be interested, but it seems that often it's a series that will turn the like. Now I'm excited to read the next one, and sometimes it's about just finding the right series that they get excited. That there's so many great from little kid series to like bigger kids series. I don't know. When was the moment you were like, oh, they picked up a book and read it? Brittany, I do remember you always had, and you probably still do, like book walls, right? Shelves covered in books.
Yeah, which has contributed to my guilt because I feel like we did everything right and I still have two pretty reluctant readers. Harrison will read when I can't say that he will pick up a book for pleasure right now. He's just not interested in that, but he will do it knowing it's what he needs to do. So I don't know. That's where we are.
And how about audiobooks?
Sully will do lots of audiobooks. Harrison's not that interested in those, but I keep trying.
Yeah.
Do you think that is like a good swap for reading?
I think it's not a replacement, but I think it's a good, like getting excited about a story as a family. It can be a cool thing. And we just did it always in the car, like it was to pick up where we left off in the car. I remember going through all the series of unfortunate events when they were little or other things, little short stories. Because I think about literacy in pretty broad ways, I am not someone who says books are the be all end all. Like there were not a lot of rules in our house because of the way I think about literacy around things, even like video gaming or games. I do believe that people they'll absorb something and then they'll back off and do something else. And and as a parent, I realized you have to make all kinds of decisions. Our screen time decision was, first of all, my kids were in the 90s. It was a different place than you're all living in right now.
You were on the forefront of a screen rule in the 90s. I never had any.
We did, because I video game too, we did video game things by once you got through that level, not time. Because I knew time was actually a really bad like decision rule for a game. So my kid would do things like they'd be reading a lot and then they'd game and then they'd go outside and ride their bike. And we just didn't have a lot of like one is better than the other. They were just different forms of mediums. We talk about them. There are a lot of options. So I don't think we made it so books were like, well, that's the better thing you should be doing.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I have found when we do like family reading time, which during the school year we were better at doing this, but it would be like after shower time and we would all sit around and read and take turns reading. And that is honestly the best way they all.
Oh, I love that.
So
yeah. Ashley and I and Nick and I we usually had something as they got older, like when they were 10 to older. Usually had something we're reading together, like a couple of copies of whatever. And then we'd kind of talk about whatever we were like. That was fun. Like our family reading also became independent, but we come back together. I know it sounds very nerdy, but
I love it.
Yeah, that's really good. No, I actually think an audiobook and the affordance of a digital text, even though I would, I understand limiting some screen time, is that there is a lot of looking up of words that you can do so easily, on digital text and returning to it that I like. They didn't do this very often, but occasionally I would record reading a book and then they could listen to it.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. But don't do that. It takes time.
Well, and I think it kind of comes back to, are you reading for pleasure? Are you reading for what purpose are you reading for? And I think audiobooks are a great place to fill that reading for pleasure and sparking that excitement with them.
I think so too. And then Heather, you already touched on it. If they're if they're reading based on an interest too, is really cool. It doesn't
Right.
have to be fiction. There's a lot of
Right.
great reading about medieval knights or reading about, whatever it is that you're excited
Well,
about.
I found this true to be for every kid I've ever known is that nonfiction is always the go-to.
Yeah.
Fiction is it's almost harder to convince them to read a fiction book than to read nonfiction.
Yep. And you already touched on this too, but I remember the first time Nick picked up some like Lord of the Rings trilogy or something. And it was just too soon because the names in that book and the vocabulary choices, sometimes you couldn't even tell the difference. Like, is this the name of someone, or is this a land, or is this a word I'm supposed to know? And he was just like, there's no way, I can't even find my way into this. And it kind of like turned him off for a minute. Like, now I'm not capable, right? I'm not capable.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and I remember like, okay, so if that's what you want to read though, like some fantasy thing, let's find something and he got hooked on Cirque to Freak, which is like all scary, vampire-y, but like 4th grade level. So not that scary, but would be too scary for some kids.
I'll have to look that up. Harrison's definitely
Yeah.
into like the horror, scary type of
Yeah.
stuff.
Cirque to Freak is pretty good. Yeah.
So would graphic novels fall into the same category too for you then? Because I know I fight this in myself too sometimes. Like, that's not a book.
God, but think about how complicated it is. Like what I love about a graphic novel is it slows your reading down. It's really hard to read a graphic novel quickly, right? Especially if you're attending to the image and the words. So I like how much, like a lot of my college students don't love reading a graphic novel when we're picking kids' books because they're like, I can't read it fast. I have to like actually look at the images and see how they're doing. I like pairing the reading of some graphic novels as that's what they love with the making of them. I put a couple links in a resource there where they can make their own comics pretty easily. And that sometimes, and God, there's just such great graphic novels right now, like really complicated ways of telling memoir or ways of telling all kinds of people's stories that I think it gets a bad rap from people who are worried it's not like a book, Yeah.
You know what? You just really changed my perspective on them altogether because I never really thought about the importance that the illustrations played.
Yeah.
Because that would build making inferences and all of those other things. So, all right, fine.
The other thing you can talk to them about is what's really cool about comics and graphic novels, right? Is that space in between the panels that they call the gutter, right? So the gutter is the place where the reader has to imagine what happened between the panels. So someone's about to do something, and then there's the end result in the other panel, and you as a reader have to put what happened in between.
Okay, because inferences are really hard for a lot of kids.
They are
really hard.
Yeah. So yeah.
All right, fine.
Damn, Professor Jackson, you're really making me feel better. So let's talk about comprehension more. I obviously have 2 kids. The older one was reading very early, but he wasn't comprehending early. He was flying through books. And I was like, look at me. I am the best parent in the world. But comprehension, like through 4th grade, was really hard for him. He's just now starting to get it.
Yeah.
Sully barely knew his alphabet going into kindergarten. But he is able to comprehend much more difficult books than Harrison ever was at his age. So can you talk to us a little bit about that and like maybe some ways parents can help at home?
Yeah. I want Heather to jump in here because she's going to be the expert working with more range of young kids than I do because I work with bigger kids, right? Like adult kids. I always have thought just the term comprehension is problematic just because you don't read to not comprehend. Like we're not reading to not understand something. We're trying to understand something. I think that sometimes the ways that schools decide whether you're a good reader or not is sometimes based on speed, right? Like you'll have a kid come up to the room, you have them read, and when they pause, they get a little check as if they're not as good at it. But good readers pause and they reread and they stop. And so
which you get dinged on when
that's
you're
right.
taking a reading
thing
test.
You actually get dinged on is the thing that people who are reading for comprehension do, which is to slow down, reread. I don't know if I understand that. Stop. And yet we're basing it on like how fast they read out loud, which is a completely different practice than silently. And we're dinging them. And then you have something like accelerated reader, which is all about how many pages have you read, So some of the things we're doing in schooling is actually working against comprehension.
Yeah.
Because it makes sense with Sully, right? Like if he's not my dad is like the slowest reader on the planet, and I've never known someone who retains could tell you what page the word is on, kind of thing. So I don't know, Heather, what do you I mean, I certainly, if I'm working with kids around comprehension, I'm going to have a lot of dialogue with them about, gosh, what do you think that means? How do you connect that? Like that kind of stuff. But I think
Right.
school teachers are the masters.
I think that most ELA curriculum is garbage. And I think, the texts that we have to read are just so unengaging and so boring. And so I can only speak to the curriculum that I'm most familiar with using, which is complete trash, but we have to use it. And it's just so dense. And the kids just aren't there to meet the skills that they want. There have been so many times where I've gone through the unit test to make an answer key, and I'm like, I don't know the answer. It could be this, but it also could be this. So I think there's a major curriculum issues. And I also think that parents need to remember, so K through 2, you are learning to read. And then once you hit 3rd grade, you are reading to learn, which is a much different skill. And I think parents panic because the pattern seekers are going to ace phonics. They're going to ace spelling. They're going to know all that stuff. And that's what looks like you're a really good reader. But to be a good reader, you need to understand what you are reading. Like anybody, this is probably not the best way to say this, but like any trained monkey can read, but are they going to actually know what they're reading?
Right.
And that's what we really want to focus on. And so I think around like 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, if they haven't gotten it by then, parents start to panic that their kid can't read. And it's like, well, yeah, they were just pretending the whole time.
Yeah, right. And I would highly recommend for teachers and for parents, Donald Miller's book, which is about reading. It's called Reading in the Wild. And she's got some good suggestions for there's a lot of fake reading that happens in school, especially
honestly, I'd say most of it.
Yeah, right. Because go back to purpose, if I'm reading for a grade or I'm reading for points or I'm reading whatever, that really changes the practice, which is why I think it's so important at home to not put all those limits and boundaries and judgment over certain and trusting, like just kind of trusting that your kids are going to have moments where Nick used to get in trouble all the time at school for hiding the book he wanted to read in the corner of the book and making him read it all the time.
Oh, smart guy.
And I know. And he was like, I've read that other one like 4 times. I don't want to read it again. I'm going to read this other one. And especially in high school, he finally had an English teacher that was like, whatever, Nick, read whatever you want. Because I know you've read of Mice and Men 4 times or whatever. But that was
And I think it kind of does come down to how well the teacher is presenting the curriculum. Because so we do have these really dense, dry, boring stories that don't relate to these children at all, that we're making them read 2, 3, 4 times. But I think it's all about how you're presenting it. Like, we're going to read it together. I will read the story to you because I want you to get the information. Then you're going to read it on your own because you need to practice reading on your own. And then you're going to read it together so that you can do this deeper comprehension practice with it. So you have to be very specific about your reasoning and your intentions for everything you're doing. Otherwise, they're going to blow you off.
Yeah, absolutely. And, lots of opportunities to sit and read together and not be worried if when they're in the classroom, they're talking about stuff, because readers talk to each other about the books.
Right.
Silent, people talk about books. I did, I'm where I'm way on this other side of thinking, I think, as a researcher is I'm actually not a huge fan of pull out reading programs in schools. And that is, and I want to qualify that by saying you got to know your own child and what they need. And sometimes, the way I think about learning is if you want a person to learn something, they have to be in the context in which that thing is being learned. And every time you pull them out from something where the other kids are doing a practice and they're doing something separate, it's better to do that instruction within the same classroom. Mm-hmm. I pulled Nick in 2nd grade out of Read Naturally because there's nothing natural about it. Nothing. And I remember a teacher telling me, you're gonna ruin him. Like this is all gonna fall apart. He won't do good in school, whatever. And we had a pretty good toe to toe. Most parents would not probably don't want to do that. You know, they don't want that kind of battle. But I knew that the worst thing we could possibly do is to make Nick think he's not capable of reading. And I knew enough about literacy that that wasn't the issue. And he's the most voracious reader in the home. You know, I couldn't keep him in books. But I knew the damage we were going to do was the damage of telling a kid, you're bad at this. Why would you do something that someone tells you you're bad at? You know? So I understand there are times you're wanting to get a kid caught up with the rest of the kids, but I just want to complicate that because, they like catch up at different times. Like they might catch up next year. So I'm not.
That's so hard because
It is so hard.
you're such an involved parent who knew exactly what he needed, and that's not often.
I know. That's why we're gonna, I'm not saying to have everybody listening to your podcast go to school next year and pull their kids out of the reading program. This person said this, but I do want to just like nuance that, right?
Right.
Like, if you know your kid and some of the damage that's being done is like, you're not good at this damage, that can be just as problematic as thinking you're gonna. And they're always going to tell you in some grade level, your kid isn't reading at grade level.
Well, God, that's such a loaded response right there because what is grade level? And are they is it fiction? Is it nonfiction? And is it because they're not hitting this one target on all of the assessments? Like that's such a loaded thing to say.
It is. Is it because their reading aloud isn't as good as?
Is it? Yeah. Is it their fluency? Is it their comprehension? Is it their fun? Like what is it?
Right.
Is it because these are all pandemic kids who had been homeschooled for a while?
Yeah,
Like,
that's 100% of the problem.
Yeah. That's real. Like you're right. That's actually, we should see where we are. And as we I noticed a huge difference in my freshman when we came
I'm sure.
back. And it wasn't even necessarily ability. It was more like a professionalism of like how to human, how to how to talk to other people, how to function in among other people, like for real. And so that because there was so much cognitive load going on with just like, how do I be in the room with other humans? They were struggling with some things I hadn't seen them struggle with in a long time, and because I believe you got to teach the person in front of you, doesn't really matter if they're prepared, right? That's where you are. That's what we're going to do. Let's figure out Google Docs again. This will be great.
oh,
Yeah. So hard. How do you find books besides library stuff? What's your go-to for like finding books that you think might be interesting for your kids?
great question.
Yeah.
Google cat books.
Yeah.
Cat graphic novel.
That's good. Actually, that's nice.
There are some good ones.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you just have to, it's just the exposure. Just see you have to take them to a large collection of books and see what they gravitate to. There's the book orders that everybody loves to pour over. Yeah. And I mean, that's really the best way. One thing I've started doing is because I hate buying birthday presents for always millions of parties we're always at. So I've started just like, hey, so there's a series right now called Dragon Girls that Isla's really into. And so I'm like, hey, let's get a Dragon Girls book and we'll get something small to go with it. And there you go. Like, so if I can help another parent find a book that their kid will read, then
for real,
happy to help.
Yeah, for real. I turn to Nerdy Book Club all the time because it is educators who have sourced that, and they have like their favorite summer readings for 6-year-olds, their favorite graphic novels for whatever. They do the nerdies every year, and it's how I find new children's books. And then I pay attention to the Caldecott Newbery Prince award-winning books and sometimes look off of there based on a kid's interest. The only other thing I always tell parents is, do you all know the site Common Sense Media? Is that familiar to you?
Mm-hmm.
I do tell them, just go to Common Sense Media. You can put in pretty much anything, especially as your kids get older, and they're not judgy about it. They're just like descriptive about it. It's got this and this and this so that you can make an informed decision.
I love Common Sense Media because they have their review and why they made that review. And it's always a little more conservative, but then there's like parent review and then kid reviews. So you can kind of like balance in the, somewhere in the middle.
And it does video games. It does TV shows, it does movies, it does books or whatever, but at least just gives you a little more information about, especially for a kid who, I have a good friend who their son does not like scary things. Like it can't be scary at all. And so it was a good go-to. I just said, go check because it'll tell you if there's any like little scary scenes in it or something that might not be their thing that they're going to. Yeah.
It's great.
So, what are some of your favorite titles for reluctant readers? I know you mentioned earlier that they always just need like that one spark to get them going. So, what are some of your go-tos?
Yeah, I depending on age group, right? I personally don't like reading graphic novels, which is kind of fun because of the slowing down. I don't want to look at the pictures. I just want to look at the words and move on with my life. But I often will recommend like starting with something like Smile because it's set in San Francisco. It's really good for California kids. It's funny. It's about someone getting braces. It's really good for like
and that cover is going to lure you in.
It totally, right? Yeah, totally. For little kids, I really like the King and Kayla series because it's got a dog and a kid and they're just on these like adventures that are super sweet and innocuous and fun. So I almost always recommend some new series book kind of thing. My go-to for older kids is usually Stargirl because it's sweet. The follow-ups to it aren't really good, but Stargirl is like, she's different, right, in her school and an oddball and then becomes beloved and then has a struggle with that. And I remember when Ashley first read Stargirl, all of a sudden she was drawing freckles on her nose and she wanted a pet rat. And you can tell. The other thing I look for is, do they talk about reading in that book? So often kids will be reading something where the protagonist reads book, like is like reading something. And all of a sudden I remember my kids would come in and I'm like, why are you all of a sudden interested in Fahrenheit 451? Like, why is this a thing that you want to read? And they'd be like, well, because, this is the book list from this, novel I'm reading. This is what this kid's reading. I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. Like literacy within literacy. So sometimes I look for books that have book recommendations within the book by the person that's the main character or a supplementary character. There's a bunch for young adults that are good for that. Yeah.
What would you say to a kid who wants to start a series but must start at book number 1? Which is not always available at the library. Shocking. That's the most checked out book.
It is not. Oh God, that's such a good question. Yeah, I would probably order it on Amazon.
I mean, I can't. This is Isla. I mean, big surprise, right? Like, if that doesn't say neurodiversity. But which I get.
Great. Let's get 3, but we'll order 1 and then
which I get, because I felt the same way. But then I think back to like the Babysitter's Club or like Magic Treehouse, for example. Every book has the same exact first chapter verbatim. I'm like, girl, you are not going to miss anything. I promise. Anything you need is going to be in the first 6 pages. And she just won't believe me.
No, I got enough OCD. I'm with her. I think, there's the kind of the inequities, right? Is like who can afford to buy books, right? And so that's a really privileged thing for me to say, like, well, I would just order the book because they can always get a book through interlibrary loan. And sometimes I can remember asking a librarian, can you get this book? That doesn't help you in the moment when you're having read this, kind of thing. But I could never convince someone when they were going toe to toe, like, I want to start with
that girl.
Let's find another series that's just like it that does have one. But that's not an easy solution.
I know. You did make me think of something else. If parents aren't already doing this, so your local library, I guess I can't speak for all of them, but more than likely has access to Libby or some kind of cloud reader system where you can download audiobooks and ebooks too onto your devices. So
that's a great suggestion. And even if that's not, your go-to, that could be the special treat, to get started.
And you do have to wait a little bit sometimes for popular titles, but it's just such a great way if you do have somebody who's just ripping through every book that you ever get to just get that next book on demand for them. It's just available right there.
Yeah. God, it is even my own childhood memories are like waiting for the next book to come out. Couldn't wait for the next whatever. And because my kids are probably closer to your age, then there's a lot of waiting for the next Harry Potter to come out and waiting in line.
But you know what? That's still a very real thing, even with everything at our fingertips right now. Do you know The Wild Robot?
Yes. Yeah. That's great.
So Isla's teacher read that one to them, which that's been a really good thing for her also to spark her reading this year in second grade was that her teacher did so many great read alouds, and not read alouds assigned to assignments, just like she just, after recess or whatever, read to them. And so The Wild Robot is 2 parts. The third book's coming out in September. And so she's read them again, which like I know these things. If kids reread books, it's good. But I'm like, you already read that one, just go to the next one. And so like I know no matter how much I know these things, I still have to fight them in myself as a parent. And so but yeah, that's been a really great series.
I like that. I like paying attention to the new series that are coming out and reading them first. I didn't hardly hand my kids stuff that I hadn't vetted, because you can get your butt handed to you.
Yeah.
Like the word butt is in it or whatever. I think if that matters.
Well, yes. So this past year, the team I was on had James and the Giant Peach and Charlotte's Web as like part of their year. And which were not books I would choose because they're very outdated and unrelatable in every way. And but James and the Giant Peach, being as old as it is and from a British author, has like ass in it. And I'm like, you guys, I really have to say this in front of third graders. Come on. And of course, like you can't skip it because the book's right in front of them. They're like, oh, it's on the house. Yeah. And so and then like Charlotte's Web, Avery walks in with a BB gun. And it's like, oh, you guys, listen, he lives on a farm 50 years ago. This is normal.
It's so true. It is why you're like, even your childhood stuff sometimes, your childhood book memory, you've forgotten some things that were in there, or they don't. I remember trying to read Little House on the Prairie series again, like as an adult, and I was like, oh my God, how did I wait in line for the next one for this? This is so terrible. And I was like, this is not interesting anymore.
My mother-in-law loved Little House on the Prairie. And she mentioned the other day, she's like, oh, do you think I live like this? I was like, no. Sure wonder.
Unlikely. Maybe unlikely.
But you bring up a good point because just recently, so I love Judy Blume was my favorite author as a kid. And I remember reading Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. And now that the movie's coming out, I'm like, oh my gosh, we should do. And then I was like, wait, no, not yet.
Nope.
We're going to wait another year.
I mean, that is just, knowing your students, knowing the students in your class and what they like. I mean, which is why I do tell future teachers, I'm sorry, but you have to be a voracious reader because for a kid who likes soccer or whatever, you have to be able to say, here are 5 books that you might find interesting based on your interest. That means you're reading a lot, reading all the time. We are pretty good even now I always have a book with me. I always have. Donald Miller calls it fringe reading, where you're waiting for the dentist or you're waiting for your sibling to get done with practice or whatever, that there's just kind of always a book that's, even if it's a picture book or whatever, that's available.
And that's something I'm really trying to be better about as a parent, making my kids do. Because I think if you it's just such a great skill to have, to just always be able to have a book and be able to read wherever you are and know that that's a great way you can entertain yourself.
I know that Ashley's Ashley's like Brittany. Ashley's a graphic designer. She graduated from Chico State in graphic design, my daughter, and her husband is computer science. And they both work remotely. So they're on screens all day, in front of the screen, drawing, in front of the screen, coding. And now they have a 6-month-old, Evie, who Ashley's like, we're really hyper aware right now that how much she's going to see us in front of the computer. And that they're trying to be more conscious about then when they're done, not getting on their phone and starting to scroll Instagram or starting to, which is a thing we all like to do. And instead, like, God, because they're good readers too, but, just making sure that Ashley's like, I got to make sure that I always have a book now because I do want to model that I'm not just reading after she goes to bed, that I'm
right. And I've made more of an effort to go get the physical book because I think there is a difference of the ages my kids are at. It's hard for them to decipher like, oh, mom's on the iPad again. Like, no, I'm reading a book, I promise. And so I actually just finished a book the other day and I was really into it. So I was reading every chance I got. And Nolan, my son, comes over. He's like, Mom, you just like really love this book. I was like, I do. It's really good. And he's like, oh, like, and it kind of like, I feel like here the gears turning. I'm like, oh, like she's like choosing to read this because she liked it. Like, okay.
Yeah. Oh my God, I'm totally hooked right now on, this is called The Gunkle.
Oh, I've heard about this book.
So funny. It's so funny. Like, and it's about grief, and it's got kids. I'm already imagining the film. It's so good.
Oh.
Yeah, it's so good. Yeah, highly recommend for adults. The Gunkle.
Yes, the one I just read to share that is called Hello Beautiful by
Yeah,
I can't.
I have
remember
not
the
read
name.
that, and someone else just said that.
I loved it.
Okay.
It was great.
Yeah.
Do you have any others? So if we need to be reading as parents, just set the example. What else? What other titles for adults are you loving?
I'm reading all of Ross Gay's stuff right now, the Book of Delights, and they're small essays. He's got a joy one too. And then I'm in the middle of an audiobook called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which so good. And it's got some gaming in it. You know, like I said, I play video games and it's got some gaming, so not everybody would like that.
Is it really gaming heavy? Because that's kind of what's always turned me off to it.
It's literary and gaming.
Okay.
Like she makes a game that's like Emily Dickinson poetry game. You know,
I've heard great things. But.
Yeah. Read the first chapter. You'll know everything you need to know about whether you'd like it or not. I do like listening to it as an audiobook, the person reading it.
Okay.
And I did read for Total Candy. I enjoyed it. I'm sorry, but I listened to Spare.
Oh, yeah. You have to listen to it. Why would you apologize?
Because, if you especially remember that I'm in an English department, so there's some judginess around.
Don't apologize to us. We want all the pop culture smut. Judginess? No.
Just a little, it's not like Jane Eyre or whatever the heck, I don't know, whatever the thing is I was supposed to be reading.
Well, they're missing out, so.
They are, and it was great to listen to. I enjoyed it very much.
Well, see, but to your earlier point, like it's okay to let a book go, because I let that one go because I kind of like, what, I get the gist here.
Yes,
good.
Yeah.
It was a slog through the time in the service. I'll just say.
I have a few notes for his ghostwriter.
Yeah, but I hope we give permission to adults just as much as we give, permission. There's so much identity work that goes on with books, right? Like if you think about the complications of middle school or junior high, and that so much of you packing a book around was about identifying with a community of friends. Are you packing around in my kids' age? Were you packing around Divergent or were you packing around Twilight? Right? Because are we going to be friends or not? And and I think about the way books also function as a barrier. Like if I get on a plane, the first thing I do is put a book in front of my face so that no one talks to me.
Right. Yeah.
Don't talk to me. And really help a shy kid to have something to do, because I've got my head in the book is a good way to check out from humanity when you need to.
Yeah, totally. I love that perspective. Well, Kim Jaxon, thank you so much for being here and taking the time and just giving us all your knowledge, because you have a lot of it.
That was fun. Yeah, well, you all do too. You think about all these things.
If you like what you just heard, and we hope you do, you can find more of us online at www.okayestmoms.com. We're also on all social media platforms, Pinterest, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at Okayest Moms Blog. Or if you want to, you can send us an email at hey@okayestmoms.com.